I am Sherra Palmer, and this is December the 15th of 2020. You are in the Stanley-Whitman House, raised by a Stanley of Farmington no earlier than 1719 and sold to a Whitman in 1735. What about the intervening years? Who lived here? What were the family names? Have you heard of the Steele or Smith family in connection with this well-known house museum? I'm here today to familiarize you with the family names of Steele and Smith. Thomas and Mary Steele Smith, their story. Thomas and Mary Steele Smith, the second couple associated with the Stanley-Whitman House Museum, were longtime residents of Farmington. They both grew up at the northern end of Main Street, very near each other, in a neighborhood that included the Woodruff and Judd families as well as the Smiths and the Steeles. Thomas Smith was born on October the 12th of 1699, the son of Samuel and Ruth Porter Smith. His mother was born in Farmington and his father originally from Middletown, although he was always associated with Farmington. He was a master weaver who taught the trade to his son. Thomas was born into a family of 3 children, William, age 12, Samuel, age 6, and Martha, age 3. A sister Ruth had died when she was just a year old, 6 years before Thomas was born. After Thomas's birth, 5 more children joined the family: John, James, Stephen, Ruth, and Elizabeth, who also died as an invalid. When these 2 older brothers both died at young ages, Samuel in 1712 and William in 1718, married, Thomas became the eldest surviving son in the family. His father had the rights to some land in Litchfield, and a situation occurred as described this way many years later by Thomas. He said, "I remember Litchfield when there was but a single wigwam erected. My father had a right of land there, and he offered to relinquish his right to the son who would go to Litchfield and defend it. As I was the oldest, I agreed to go up and take care of the land. The township was called Bantam then. Well, I stayed at Bantam a few weeks, but I soon became sick of my undertaking. There were no girls and no cider, and I relinquished my land. All my brothers made the same trial and with the same event." The irony is that somewhat later in their lives, 2 of Thomas's brothers, as well as 2 sisters, moved to Goshen and lived there. Hopefully, there was cider in that area by then. In January of 1725, Thomas Smith married Mary Steele only 8 days after his father had died a long and painful illness. For some time before Samuel's death, the elder Smith, confined to his bed, had had great trouble breathing and been unable to sleep. Thomas's marriage must have taken place during a chaotic and confusing time. His father's death left Thomas with a house, a barn, and substantial acreage. His new wife, Mary, was the older daughter of Ebenezer and Sarah Hart Steele. In December of 1720, her father had purchased the Back Lane house. No documents exist to determine where Mary lived in the years prior to her marriage, but she probably lived here at the house starting in 1720, the year her parents purchased the property. 2 years later, Ebenezer died, and lacking sons, his estate was distributed to her just a month before her marriage. It took that many years to settle. When Mary married Thomas Smith, the house became his property, although Mary was known to sign documents and often co-signed land deals as lands were bought and sold within the family during the time of their marriage. Possessed of 2 houses and considerable other property, the couple set up housekeeping in this dwelling house where we are, on Back Lane, where Mary delivered their first 5 children. It is possible, although unproven, that her sister Sarah and her mother lived here with them for a time. Maybe we'll find that out. The Smiths' family situation was marked by tragedy when their first 2 children, Steele, age 3, and Samuel, age 14 months, died within 2 weeks of each other in April and May of 1729. But research has failed to reveal the cause of these children's death. 4 months later, Mary gave birth to a 3rd son and named him Steele after his deceased brother. A daughter, Sarah, was born 2 years later, followed by a 2nd Samuel in 1733. In February of 1735, Mary and Thomas sold this house to the Reverend Samuel Whitman and moved their growing family back to Main Street, to the larger house there. For 7 more children, 3 sons and 4 daughters, were born in the Main Street house over the next 12 years. Bickford has described Farmington as overwhelmingly rural and agricultural during the colonial period during Thomas's lifetime. The majority of Farmington men were mainly dependent on farming for their income. Thomas, however, was primarily a weaver who regularly supplemented his income from farming. He was one of a growing class of Farmington men who paid a faculty tax. This tax was required of those who pursued a trade to add to their farm income. And in a tax list of 1752, he was listed along with shoemaker Elijah Coles, part-time surveyor Elijah Porter, and carpenter Judah Woodruff. Thomas continued to be named as a weaver in several town records and is identified as a weaver in the Brander's book. Smith was considered a professional weaver. Families raised, cleaned, and spun their own wool and then brought it to Thomas to be woven into cloth. He was also worked with linen, often creating cloth of checkered and plain patterns. His account book shows that Thomas made yards and yards of fine linen, ticking, toe cloth, checkered cloth, which he noted was very slow work, and checkered shirting as well. He also produced striped drugget and colorful wool blankets. Entries indicate that Thomas started with just 1 customer, but after a few years he had enough business to hire a helper to complete his orders. His book shows an itinerant weaver, Thomas Lowry, living with the Smiths on Main Street in 1756 and 1757. Lowry paid room and board and in turn received payment to weave the more elaborate patterns for Smith. Thomas's sister, Sherra Smith Stanley, a familiar name, of Goshen, periodically sent 2 of her daughters to her brother in order that they could learn tailoring. The 2 sisters, Esther and Elizabeth, did weaving, spinning, and tailoring for their uncle. And until the recent discovery of an account book by Sam Jones, Thomas Smith's account book, covering the years 1750 to 1780, would have been the only known weaver's record to have survived in farming for the period. Thomas and Mary remained in Farmington for their entire life. They had a close marriage, and Mary was described as beloved by her sons. Several of their children had scattered, including son Steele, who became a founding settler and prominent citizen of Windsor, Vermont. 3 of their sons, Deacon Thomas, Samuel, and William, stayed nearby in Farmington, and William, in his 1786 will, left anything I have to his parents. Thomas was unable to continue as a weaver during his final years. Hurt seriously in a fall, he spent the last 3 years of his life confined to his bed. Described as amiable, venerable, and cheerful, he retained the vigor of his mind until his last hour. He remained fond of visitors, and especially delighted in conversing with the young. Thomas died in October of 1788, and Mary died 3 months later. That is no surprise. They were buried in memento mori with their 2 infant sons. Their tombstones are broken and unreadable. Their graves marked only by an unusual double footstone bearing their initials, MS and TS. The Smiths' 10 years in this house were marked by both tragedy and happiness, and the loom on the upper room of the house reminds us of their presence here. Thank you.